started. I think we'll have a few more people coming along as we go. We'll go around the room just quickly, and if you don't mind, we'll put you on the spot. Just to say hi, good morning, say your name, maybe what age your child or children are, and we'll get started. Yeah, I'm Cody Nornberg. I am working with Becky and Matt. I am mostly in charge of the PYP, which you'll learn about what that means a little bit more today. But I'm in charge of making sure that the primary year's curriculum and assessment and teaching practices come into what we'll talk about today. I came from many years of experience in the IB, working with PYP, working with the MYP program, and all the way down to our early years as well. I'm excited to be here. I'm thrilled to see parents here. It's wonderful to see some returning faces as well, and I'm excited to talk to you today and hear your perspectives. And this is Becky.
I know everyone pretty well. My name is Becky Lugo. I'm the assistant director here who oversees the MYP, the middle school program. I am also our preschool director, and so I have the very little and the very big kids at school, and then Mr. Nornberg picks them up in the middle. But I've been at Fairmont for 12 years. I love it. My kids are here. I love IB. I'm so excited that you guys are back for round 2, and I'm excited to get started. So I'm going to do a quick whip around. I'm going to put you on the spot right here. It's nice for everyone to know what age everyone else's children are before we kind of get into what we're going to get into.
Rose Borson, my son is in 6th grade, and then I have a daughter who's a freshman at prep.
Linda Reek, and my son is Matthew Reek, and he's 5 years old in kindergarten.
Sammy, my son is 6 years old and in kindergarten, same class with Matthew together, yes.
Sejal Desai, my daughter is Zaira Desai, and she's in 7th grade.
Hi, I'm Kay Williams. My son is Delinder Lopez, and he is in 4th grade.
Hi, my name is Monica Ortega. My son is Matthew Ortega, and in 4th grade.
Perfect. And then we have some visitors. I know you all know Miss Alvarado, and then we have some visitors from our business office who are going to make us look right out. Okay, so
Today's kind of a continuation on what we talked about originally. We'll be looking at PYP, MYP, a little bit more program-specific information. We'll give you a chance to kind of jump in and see what it's like in the classroom and see how it feels to be as a student in the IB world of learning. So we'll start out with something hopefully interesting and entertaining. We'll see.
So one of the things that drew us to IB here at Fairmont specifically was this idea that we wanted our kids to be future ready. We have always had high academic outcomes. Our students are very diligent learners. They're great at memorizing and recalling and rote memorization. But we wanted to make sure that they were ready to make connections when the information wasn't there. And so we have a little video to get you started. This is also a thinking routine that we use in the classrooms with kids quite a bit that I'm going to ask you to indulge us and try. So we're going to show you just a very quick video, and if you could jot down some of the things you see in the video, some of the things you think about, and maybe something you're wondering, specifically about your children and how they might apply to them. video that comes to us from the World Economic Forum. I know it's very quick. If you had a chance to jot a few things down, you can. We've shown this video to a bunch of kids and they're always like, can we see it again before we talk about it? Would you like to see it again? If you're comfortable just moving on, that's okay. I'll give you a couple minutes to think about it and then we'll move right on. So as you're writing, it's kind of neat to think about, this is the first time in human history that we've been aware of a revolution as it's in progress. So we had the Industrial Revolution, we had the agriculture, the first, second, and third. We were only aware of these revolutions after history had sort of closed the door on them. This is the first time with the combinations of AI, biotechnology, all of these different fields coming together, that as a human race, we're aware of this revolution as it's in process or progress, which is really a kind of a unique place for your kids to be, and for us. So the World Economic Forum is responsible for kind of keeping us up to date on all of the things that are coming next. They've published this really wonderful list for us. This list is published in 2018 with a reflection of the top 10 skills to be successful in 2015, and then translated what they anticipate in 2020. So this list is from 2018. We're coming into 2020 in a couple of weeks. It's kind of an interesting point of reflection as you're working through your C3 pointers. Is there anyone that's brave enough to share out something you noticed from the video or something you noticed in this list? I will fill up your coffee. I will bring you a snack.
I'll go with the video. I noticed, like, what it made me actually think of, or what I saw was a lot of like engineering, which ingenuity. And then it made me wonder what truly isn't possible, because things that in the past that we thought are not possible, like this is absolutely impossible, we're now doing.
That's a great wonder. Like, what is possible?
Is that a wonder for you?
That's a wonder for me, sorry.
Yeah.
What's possible?
Yeah.
What is
what's
possible? Like, great start. Anybody else?
Oh, sure. So for me, what I saw was the evolution and how quickly it's happening. Like, I mean, in the blink of an eye, you know, we went from here to here. And what it makes me wonder is, one, where are we headed?
Right.
And then two, how is the job force changing with that evolution?
Right. Those are great pieces of feedback.
For me, like with cognitive flexibility, we live in a time where I feel like we don't know anymore what truth is.
Yeah.
So how are we gonna define that? How are we gonna say what we know is true, what is real knowledge versus what is?
Right. Claim testers. This idea of how do I discern the truth? How do I know what I believe? That great pieces of observation.
There's an awesome course, not in the MYP, but in the DP, the diploma program, which is our grade 11 and 12. And MYP gets into a little bit of the ethics and the philosophy, but there's a course called Theory of Knowledge, which basically studies what we know and how we learn and how we know what we know, which is a really interesting concept if you think about what you were thinking about in grade 11 and 12. And that's where we're headed. All of what we do today, all of what we talk about, PYP, MIP, are building blocks towards that ability to kind of take that metacognitive approach, thinking about thinking. It's fascinating, fascinating.
Is there anything else you noticed from this list of skills?
How do we know what?
Anybody wants to point out? I think cognitive flexibility is really interesting that it's making an appearance on this list. Cognitive flexibility is your brain's ability to jump between tasks that are completely different. So can I bounce from one activity and then whoop, my brain can click gears into something that's totally different, totally different, into totally different, which is where it's kind of interesting to reflect on our kids who, as teachers, we're always like, oh my gosh, they're so fast paced, they're always multitasking, they're doing 3 things at once, they're on their iPad, they're doing homework, they flip through things real fast. But it's really building the skill of cognitive flexibility, not always in the way we want them to, but that's really what they're working on, is that ability for their brain to jump between tasks very quickly, which is something that they definitely have a leg up on us.
Well, and research also is showing, I mean, this might be an unintended consequence to the technology and the development of technology, but if you've noticed patterns in the way people communicate and the way it's probably changed in the last 5, 7, 8 years, also the way that we interact with media or interact with people. It's becoming very choppy, very small, minute. So, you've got that cognitive flexibility. Again, if we know, if that's what's happening in society, research is looking at, okay, if that's happening, what's going to happen next? What do we need to do to respond to that? How can we, as educators, either help to curb that into a more positive direction, or how can we respond? And that's something that we really are concerned with and thinking about as we move forward too.
This is a big thing that brought us to the IB, is that the IB gives our current curriculum at Fairmont framework that puts them into this bucket of being future ready. So all of the skills, the concepts, the math, the reading, all of those things are still the same. They're still essential knowledge, but how we give them to kids, how we ask them to work with the material is different. It's not just memorizing facts from a textbook and taking a test. It's learning some information and can you synthesize that information into a new idea? And that's really what we're going to get into today, is to show you a little bit of our teacher planning process and what that looks like inside our curriculum.
Before we close the doors, anybody else wanted to share? I want to give everybody a chance to have a voice. If you had something you wanted to share, either you see, think, or wonder.
This is also our first time through like this non-introduction workshop, and so please, like, let's be very dynamic. If there's we could use your help. First time through it, lots of feedback would be helpful to us.
To give a little background as well, what's the See, Think, Wonder? This would be what we call a thinking routine that we would use in class with students, and this can be applied to any topic, any subject, any concept, any approach. And you can see, just by that short, we only took 3 or 4 minutes here to have some feedback, but you can see how quickly it can develop or how broad discussion can go. So what we would do, this could even be something that you scale over a few days, or something that we'd use as a reflection piece, or maybe you would do a See, Think, Wonder at the beginning of a unit, develop some thinking, get some initial ideas, do it again at a midpoint, look at how you're changing the way you think, or the way you question, or the way what you know, and then even again at the end of a unit, you come back and you can look at those points throughout the course of 6, 8, 10 weeks, and it's great as a reflection piece for the students to come back and say, oh, I can't believe I thought that at the beginning. Or, wow, look at what I've learned, and look at what questions I have now. So there are a whole bank of thinking routines, they're called, out of Harvard. It's a project called Project Zero, and this is one of those that we use to help facilitate thinking, help facilitate questions, and to help facilitate kind of that discussion piece, which is, again, really important for us. As part of the IB, a lot of our instruction is focused on driving discussion, driving questioning, and really pushing our thinking a little bit deeper. So it's a great tool, and that leads into our next kind of phase of the workshop here. This is a diagram that's specific to the PYP, but most of the concepts and most of the information here is not specific to the MYP. This, if you can think about it as a functioning diagram, you'll see that the outside is focused on the learning community and transdisciplinary learning. Now the word transdisciplinary, that's a really fancy, really big word for just meaning that we cross subjects. So traditional education might have you sit and have a math lesson for half an hour, and then you say, okay, close your math books, let's open up your English books, close the English books, and you kind of go through the day according to subject or according to specific subject areas. What we're trying to do is take it a transdisciplinary approach, which means we're looking at bigger concepts here, and we're taking what we have as called transdisciplinary theme. So we have, actually here, yes, right behind this we go. You can see here and also here these colored posters, how we express ourselves, how we organize ourselves, who we are, sharing the planet. These are what we call transdisciplinary themes. And they are overarching, they are universal, and they bleed into all of the programs that we have, the PYP, the MYP, and the diploma program. So they have the same approach to thinking, the same kind of umbrellas, and then in those, we start to look at subjects, or in those, we start to look at concepts, and then perhaps even knowledge, skills, and understanding. So we have this really big idea, and then as we, depending on the program and depending on what you're learning about, we start to take it down into a more narrow view. So we have big themes, and then from the themes, we go into subjects and concepts, right? So you might have a theme of who we are, and just as an example, sorry to stand behind you here, But we have an example here. This is actual planning that we did over the summer. Ms. Lugo led a series of workshops for our staff and faculty. And we focused on who we are. And the tagline for that is kind of an inquiry into rights and responsibilities, which is still very broad, very big. You think, what are your rights? What are your responsibilities? You could go lots of different directions. And then what we do to further define that is we say, okay, in second grade, we're going to focus on communities and citizenship. And then if you imagine community and citizenship, could you take those down into subjects? Could you add some ideas about subjects from community? Could you talk about science? Could you talk about math? Definitely social studies, literacy. So what we do is we go from these really big ideas and we bring it down still with the same idea and still always back and forth coming into what we see here. So you've got that theme, subjects, concepts, and we get more and more narrow as we go through. Yeah? That's kind of the big picture of how we plan and how we think and how the approach to learning. It's called an inquiry-based approach. Inquiry, always asking questions, driving towards discussion, different perspectives, and as we move forward. What we see here is kind of the nitty-gritty of what we do when we plan and what we think about as teachers. And this is something, you'll hear lots of jargon. The IB is big on new words and using fancy acronyms, and you'll hear PYP and MYP and POI and, key
They
concepts.
drive your teachers crazy.
Yeah, ATLs, especially if you're brand new, you're learning a new way to teach, but we're also learning 75 new vocabulary terms, and you have
Lots of
thousands
acronyms.
of pages of documentation. So there's a lot to learn, and as we start to adopt more and more of this, we as teachers have to really stay focused and really stay active in our learning process too. So it's not just here, you guys go and learn. We as teachers are also really involved in the learning process. So what we see here, this is an excerpt from what we call the POI.
Ooh.
Here's
You keep it.
Okay, the POI is our program of inquiry, and actually, if you look this way, I'm glad that we're in this room because it gives you a chance to really see the POI from kind of a 10,000-foot view, if you will. So this is bits and pieces of our whole primary year's program of inquiry, right? So these are essentially, this, when it's full, these would be all of the units that we teach for the whole year for every grade level. Sorry. And you can see what we do is, in the POI, each unit has the essential elements. And every unit that we teach has the same essential elements. Every unit has a theme, has one of these. Every unit has concepts. Every unit has skills. And every unit has specific subject and knowledge that we convey, right? It might change depending on the unit, but they all essentially have the same building blocks, right? So now, I can tell you what those building blocks are, if that makes sense, moving forward. So here, now for logistical reasons, normally this would be laid out from top to bottom. So this would be the top section, if you can imagine just taking this and kind of transforming it here. We start with our transdisciplinary theme, who we are. From that, we develop central ideas and lines of inquiry, right? Okay, so a central idea is just that. We have units of inquiry that run anywhere from 4 weeks to 15 weeks, depending on the grade level, depending on the content, depending on the interests of the students as well, right? So we go from transdisciplinary theme. This one's talking about physical, mental, social, spiritual health, and actually this is no grade 2 parents in here. No, this is the unit that they're currently working on, and it's great too because it's so connected to what kind of real life is. And if you read the central idea, take just a moment to read that. Perhaps you can have a personal connection, or you can dig into that for yourself. And then if you go down, looking at the lines of inquiry. Could any of you speak to any of those ideas personally? Would you have some questions coming out of that? This is grade 2, mind you. Grade 2. So, again, going from big ideas and we're starting to take it into a little bit more specific. The central idea is derived, these kind of, the concepts work back and forth. Responsibility will link to one of those lines of inquiry. Which line of inquiry do you think responsibility would touch best?
Stay healthy.
Any others?
Consequences.
Any others? Okay, how about reflection? Would reflection fit into any of those lines of inquiry?
Stay healthy.
Hmm? Causation?
Yeah, better lifestyle.
Okay. So, essentially, these key concepts, which are also always the same, we have a set of 7 key concepts, and they fit into any unit at any point that we decide. They stay the same, they never change. And what we try to do is teach through those concepts. It's called conceptual learning paired with the inquiry-based learning. It's taking big ideas and really breaking them down again. And what we do is we take responsibility. That's a big, you say, hey, be responsible, Mr. Alito. What does that mean? Be reflective. Okay, yes, we understand that, but you say that to an 8-year-old, they probably would need some help, right? So what we do is we take it further down into what we call related concepts, okay? Now I'm throwing a lot of jargon, a lot of vocabulary at you, just trying to get you a sense of how we plan it, and then we'll look at an example. So, for example, looking at responsibility. If we say, okay, how do we be responsible? How do you be responsible? Just posing the question.
Do your homework.
Okay.
We're talking second grade, right?
You can be an adult too now if you want. Probably different responsibilities, but so doing your homework. What else can we do to be responsible?
Get on time early.
Get up
Get to
early.
school early.
Be on time? Be on time, gentlemen?
Actually, you two can bring that.
It's okay, you are on time when you arrive, right? Yeah, you're always on time. Okay, so be on time, do your homework. What else might a second grade student say?
Clean up after themselves.
Brush
Clean
your
up?
teeth. Not
Get
have
up
ice
in the
cream for
morning.
breakfast.
No ice cream for
Like-
breakfast. Get up, have a healthy breakfast. Okay, so we see most of those would fit under the concept of choice. So what we would be teaching is we would probably do maybe a see, think, wonder. You see the word responsibility, or we put up a picture of a messy house.
Mhm.
What's your responsibility in that situation? We get some ideas, and then we drive back towards choice. So what we're doing is we're setting up examples to give them an idea about how do we be responsible, and then we drive towards, okay, it's your choice. Do you have to be on time? Do you have to clean your room? Do you have to eat a healthy breakfast? So we're driving towards, and we're doing activities that would perhaps touch the word choice. Teaching them, giving them examples, giving them options. Maybe in class you would do the same. We used to, when I did this, we would have a slightly different take. We would come and destroy the classroom, completely destroy the classroom. We'd turn over chairs, turn over desks, throw pencils, markers, everything all over. And the kids would come in and they'd freak out, oh my gosh, what happened? Say, I got really upset. I didn't know what to do last night and I couldn't do my homework. And we'd make up this big long story and I got so frustrated and I did this and that. And it's a great, what we call provocation. Kids come in and they're in reality, their classroom's destroyed. What do we do? And it drives so many conversations about what's our responsibility. How could I be more mentally well? How could I control my emotions? How could I think about strategies? So what we try to do, again, is teach these concepts, but then in a real way. So rather than just talking about responsibility, we ask them to model it. We give them examples. We put them in role play situations, right? Okay, so questions so far? I know it's a lot of this, but okay, so moving along. Basically, our planning process, again, going from big to small, if we keep going down this list, have you guys heard or seen these words anywhere? Hopefully. Balanced, principled, thinkers, communicators, caring, knowledgeable. They are called learner profile words, yes. They're learner profile words. And these, again, this is another set of vocabulary that doesn't change. You might have seen the picture at the back with the faces, the kind of silhouettes in the center there. The learner profile poster.
Oh, you're good.
The learner profile words here. Again, these are basically the heart of the IB. They are the center of what the IB does. And at every program, they focus on these learner profile attributes. These are ways that we can approach things. These are ways that we can be as people. And balanced and principled, when we think about these concepts of responsibility, reflection, causation, and we think about, okay, that means we have to be balanced. That means we have to be principled. We can also teach through these ideas. So there's a lot of terminology, and the reason that we have so much terminology is because this is really big concepts, but we have to we have to manage that, right? We have to manage these big ideas in ways that we can make it true for the students. All right, and then going further down, here we have really focused skills, right? And I'm nearly finished with this bit, I promise. We break down into what are called approaches to learning and sub-skills. So if we think about thinking, social, self-management, research, what skills, if we wanted to learn about responsibility, what skills would we need to be responsible? What skills would your child need in order to be responsible? Doesn't matter what grade. What skills do they need? Do you want them to do their homework every night? Do you want them to be on time? If you
I have
want-
a third grader, decision making would be really helpful at home.
Yeah.
Right, like, I know that you're aware of these two
Self-awareness.
choices, but if you can move forward, that would be awesome.
Okay.
Sixth grader, we've got a ditto here.
Okay. If you wanted to teach them about accepting responsibility,
Oh, yeah.
is that a skill that your kids probably would do well to learn? Maybe some adults that you know as well? Right? So the idea is here, again, we've gone from this really big idea about who we are, mental, physical, emotional health, and we've gone all the way down through, and now we're looking at, okay, I need to do some evaluation, I need to look at myself, I need to look at my surroundings, I need to think about what my choices are and how I can make responsible choices. I need to think about what a healthy lifestyle means. Inform, these are those finite skills that we would be having a lesson on. And we would really focus on this week, okay, we're talking about accepting responsibility. We have 10 different activities that drive towards that, okay? Questions before we step forward? I see some, maybe I'm getting it, I'm not quite sure. Comments, thoughts? Now take a parent's role. What do you think from a parent's perspective?
So this is something that's implemented in second grade, not kindergarten yet?
The PIO, so the MYP is implemented across all grade levels. Every student who is enrolled at HAC is a part of this program. This is just a sample from from second grade. As we work through today, I think you get a little taste of kinder, and then we're gonna do a little junior high activity, so that you have an idea of sort of what it feels like to be, this is sort of from the teacher perspective, what like the deeper guts of the planning process look like.
And do we as parents have access to having in-depth information so that we at home can start practicing and be well
Implementing it.
informed on how to deal with certain situations?
Absolutely.
I'm sorry you asked that. Great question. Kind of to tag on what your original question was, this is one, what we call unit of inquiry. Every grade level has between 4 and 6 units of inquiry throughout a year. So Matthew would have in kindergarten between 4 and 6 units of inquiry. All the way up to grade 5, they have units of inquiry. Once they get into the MYP, they go into subjects. So they would have a math class, a literacy class, science, design, all of this. In the primary years, it's different because they have only one homeroom teacher. They have specialists, of course, for music, science, lab, this and that. But the homeroom teacher is in charge of teaching all of those general subjects. So we have a really big unit, and then in that unit, every grade kind of looks at the different elements. And the reason we have this big overview is so that we make sure that, okay, if they're doing life cycles in kindergarten, they're doing it again maybe in 3rd grade and then maybe again in 6th grade, so that we can see that, make sure that they're getting a holistic education that hits all of the pieces that we need. So this would be literally one of those pieces of paper only. And then in every grade level you would have all of those units spread across. Does that touch on?
Yes, thank you.
Let's skip ahead. And coming back to, you asked, is there something that parents can use as a resource? The answer is absolutely yes. please check this week's newsletter. I have created, Becky and I, a bank of parent home extension activities, basically, focused on the learner profiles. It's one small document, one small piece, but it gives you a couple things that you can do at home, big ideas for the learner profiles. Have a flick through. There are at least 15 or 20 activities that you can just, okay, look at it, choose one, try it out, see how it goes. Yeah, but don't expect change overnight. Give it time. Keep working at it. It's a process.
I'm praying for a miracle here.
Okay.
Just hold on tight. Let an expectation.
Patience. I tell our teachers patience and positives. Focus on what's working.
It's tough.
Just keep moving. Alright. It's okay. So I think we're gonna go ahead. We've kind of hit on some of these ideas. I'm gonna give Becky a little bit of chance to after we look at some really cool pictures. This is what it looks like in class. This is some of our kindergarten, or actually our young guys and girls. They had in their unit of inquiry, beginning the year, they started to look at life cycles, they started to look at seeds and germination, and so rather than just open a science book and look at pictures of it, they went to the store and they got seeds, and everybody got a chance to vote for which seeds they want, and they sorted the seeds and they examined the seeds, they looked at why they're different, how they're different, and then they started to look at what do we need for seeds to grow. You can see they did some graphing up here. You've got some math concepts falling into this. You've definitely got some science concepts. You've got some writing here. They're doing observations. They're doing scientific journaling, if you will. So the concept here is that it's not literacy. Okay, open up your math books, open up your literacy books. It's we're looking at life cycles and we're doing math by tallying the number of seeds we have. We're doing writing by creating T-charts or observing and writing adjectives. And then we're doing the science. We're actually doing the science here. So you can see some real life. And if you go back there now, I think this is pretty well overtaken with seeds and crops and all of this. So that it's not just, okay, we learned about it and that's it. We come back to it, and probably throughout the year they'll come back to it and say, oh hey, let's look at it now. What happened? What's growing? Things die, things don't die. Hopefully things live. Maybe we can eat some of them at some point. So again, lots of really cool concepts coming through here. All right.
This was a fun activity. The kids did a See, Think, Wonder routine as they started this activity, and to watch a group of kindergartners puzzle over a whole bunch of seeds, they were really quick to say, oh, this is corn because this. They were totally wrong. But they were like, oh, this one's definitely corn. I'm like, I'm 100% sure I can smell it. And we're like, oh, why do you think that? But allowing the kids to explore the content and generate their own ideas before we walk them through these different concepts really cements their understanding and builds their learning over time. So if, I'm sure you've had people like us lecture at you and say it's this, 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 and this. All of those big vocab words that Mr. Nornberg threw at you, I'm sure as soon as you walk out, they're gone. Kids are the same way. And so if we allow them to experiment and to touch and to think before we deliver information, it really sticks. And so this is just another little fun activity.
But do they have time to do all this? Because what we see right now is that most of them are so overwhelmed. It's just it's my feeling. I don't know how other people's feelings are.
Well, the answer, absolutely, we have time. It's the way that we use our time, and what we're in that transition phase now. And I can see that there is a little bit of question, there's a little bit of concern on the parents' part, which is understandable. And it looks different. It definitely looks different, and it feels different for the kids too. So they might come home and tell you, well, we have this and we have this and we have this, and I don't know what to do. Or some days you come home and we didn't do anything. Of course, trust us, they definitely are not doing too much. We're very conscious of making sure that nobody's overloaded, but also making sure that what we're doing is impactful. It sticks with you. And it's definitely different from what we and I can speak personally. It's way different than anything I went through when I was in primary school, secondary school. So, if you have questions, feel free to come and talk to us, or if you have concerns, we want to know that from the parent's perspective. We need to know what you're feeling, we need to know what you're thinking. But at the same time, I have many, many years of experience, and I've seen the transition, and it takes probably 12, 18 months, sometimes 2 years to really get comfortable in this, because it's like going to a brand new job that you have no experience in, right? You can imagine going and trying to learn something while you're doing it. It takes a little bit of time to get traction, but we have experts and we have wonderful families that come and join us. And my hope is that you guys can learn a little bit and you can communicate. to other parents, and we want you to be sharing now. We want you to be knowledgeable. We want you to be comfortable, confident. And if you're not, watch it online a few times, get used to it, and then come back with us for questions or if you need some follow-up.
Can I share,
Yeah.
you know, my son's been at Fairmont for a while now, and what I realized in the last few months is when they do an activity based on, you know, whether it's science or social studies, as soon as he jumps in the car, it's like, Mom, let me tell you about what we learned and what we did. And we didn't win, but so-and-so team won because, you know, they were studying gravity and like so-and-so did this and we did this and ours didn't work. So they're learning from each other. But I guess for me, what I'm seeing is that excitement, a little bit more excitement, and that it's really sticking a little bit more. But it's interesting that he asked that because in my head, I'm also thinking like these projects or activities take a little bit more time than a normal, you know, chapter 4, week 1, right?
Sit down and read this.
Sit down and read this. I know tomorrow we're in chapter 5, right? So how will they still learn the same content through the whole year, or is it abbreviated? How does that?
I think that's where we ask the parents and the kids and the teachers to take a long range view.
Mm.
And so like in that moment, in that week's lesson plans, just like we went through a bunch of vocabulary words, we took 20 minutes to go through vocabulary terms with you. As soon as you leave, they're gone. So yeah, we took 20 minutes in class to go through these big terms, but if we take 40 minutes and allow you to co-construct your knowledge and to get into that, it's when we hit that level of excitement, you change the way your brain is processing information. Where you're connecting knowledge and content to an experience is where we're going to cement a deeper understanding. And so as we build through IB, it's taking that transition pathway through rote memorization and experiences and starting to bridge them together. And so kind of take today as a little example of what it could be like for your kids. There's still a combination of rote memorization and sit down and read, but we're blending in some of those deeper learning activities that help cement understanding. So the long range goal is for them to graduate for 4 years from now to remember that math activity in grade 4 that set the foundation for algebra, right? So that's the goal. I could bust their chops all day long and have them repeat facts and understand, but if they don't carry that understanding with them long term, they might as well not know it, right? And so that's sort of the delicate balance.
That's definitely one thing I've noticed with my son is that something he learned through an activity at the beginning of the year, he still holds on to that and is using it today, whereas I feel if he would have just sat down and read something, and you know, I could ask him about it a week later and he probably wouldn't know it
Yeah, maybe
without
30%.
reviewing it,
Mhm.
so.
And that's where a lot of the stuff that Mr. Nordenberg talked about with how we build a program of inquiry, all of the curriculum will spiral. And so when we're talking about responsibility in grade 2, with some examples that teach personal responsibility, when we move into middle school, we're really talking about social responsibility. You know, what is your responsibility as a citizen to make ethical decisions that influence others? And so you can't do that without having a deep understanding of what it means to be responsible for yourself. And so all of this stuff is progressive. The continuum is going to grow with your kids. And so these themes that Mr. Nordenberg talked about, as they grow up into middle school, they translate to become a little bit more mature. Instead of who we are, we're talking about identities and relationships. There's a deeper sense of interconnection. Instead of how we express ourselves, it's this idea of culture, of personal and cultural expression, and how where you come from influences your point of view. Really helping our middle school kids understand that not everybody comes from the same place, and not everybody has had the same experiences, not everybody feels the same way. And so when we attack a problem from 2 different angles, being open-minded about those different perspectives helps you come to a better solution. But it takes a lot of time, and we have to grow through it. Where's my clicker?
I'll be a clicker.
We're gonna fast forward through this one. Okay, so we're gonna do a little sneak peek into an NYP class. This is a new course for us. This is a quick overview, but the IB brought us this idea of future ready, forward thinking, taking these different disciplines and finding the interconnection was really, really important to us. It's the idea of where does science meet philosophy? Where do history and ethics overlap? And this is what we wanted to help our kids start to synthesize and start to think about as they prepare for high school. So this is a course that we built out over a 3-year period. It starts in grade 6, and the kids are focusing on this biggest picture of where they are in place and time. Their content, they're studying the history of the solar system. We look at, how did everything get to be here? Which for sixth graders is this really like metacognitive mind-blowing discussion. I'm like, this is my ring, this is my wedding ring. How did this metal come to Earth? How did this get here? And so we get into these really scientific discussions of how the elements were created, Big Bang, all of these different ideas. But then conceptually, we're talking about how do theories evolve over time. The Big Bang is a contested theory. And so we go through this idea of how do you know what you know? We read these different samples from Catholic priests, from scientists, and we take all these different perspectives and synthesize them together and allow the kids to just recognize different perspectives. We talk to them about how you might believe one thing today, but you've learned new things over time. There's been new research, there've been new discoveries, there's new perspective, and it's okay for your ideas to evolve. That's how we grow. So it's a big part of sixth grade. Seventh grade, we move into early life. So the sixth graders go from beginning of the solar system up through early life in humans. And then seventh grade picks up with early life and moves through agriculture and civilization. So this is a scientific background, and then this has a history background. In going through all of these ancient civilizations, which is a repeat of some of the history from sixth grade core classes, they're picking it up again in a different way. They're learning about the positives and negatives of interconnection, how different societies work together. They're just about to get into this big discussion about why societies collapse. And it might be for, there's a whole bunch of scientific reasons with climate change, there's a whole bunch of political reasons with government, and they're looking at these events that have multiple causes, which is kind of fun for seventh graders. Then our eighth graders will pick up with civilization, and they'll move through innovation, sustainability in the future. So our eighth graders are having some neat discussions about the present acceleration, artificial intelligence, ethics, innovation, and then they'll be building into a community service project where it kind of puts all these things together, which is really cool. In the big history project, there are...
Can I go through those classes?
Okay, so I get to teach this class. It is by far the highlight of my week. You are all invited to come by. It's every Thursday, period 7.
Sounds so cool, right?
It is, and the kids absolutely love it, at least mine. I don't know if you can attest to what Chris is up to. Chris is not yet there, but I'll get him. Can you click for me?
Yeah.
So, in this class, we're really taking a new perspective, and it's about this intersection of disciplines, where how does science influence history? You're talking about why civilizations collapse, but there are so many reasons. As our kids grow up through elementary school, they often take a single perspective, and they don't think about these multiple causes. We've got this little puppy dog that chewed on a shoe. Why did it happen? Was there something tasty on the shoelace? Did you step in something? Is he teething? So you go through all of these different reasons that an event could occur. So now, keep going. I'm trying to fast forward. Oh, I went too fast. Okay, so I'm going to ask you, I'm going to have you try an activity. It's really short. This is one that we did with the kids. In addition to causation, one of the big things we're trying to help them understand is this idea of scale, while we look at things from different perspectives. So I'm going to give you just 3 minutes. If you have a piece of paper and a pen, could you please write the history of your life? Go. You don't have to share if you don't want to. This is a really brief personal narrative. About 2 more minutes. shy, but if you need to do some bullet points real fast, it doesn't have to be pretty. Don't worry about semantics or grammar or any of that stuff. I'm going to go ahead and stop you. If you had more, you can just kind of keep that in your mind. This is something that I would have included had I had a few more minutes to write. And one of the things we've worked very intentionally with in developing this class is to include a lot of writing. This is an example of, an opportunity for students to write without the pressure of mechanics and grammar and a rubric. Anytime you write is great, and this is an opportunity for that embedded in this class. Okay, now, if you could, by a show of hands, raise your hand if you included in your personal narrative something about your time in high school. Okay, hand down. If you included your childhood. If you included your parents. You wrote a lot. Okay, now, if you included your parents' childhood. Okay, raise your hand if you included your grandparents. Okay, if you included something that happened more than 100 years ago. If you included something more than 1,000 years ago. Okay, so this is a little example that we do with kids when we're starting to introduce them to the concepts of scale, over place and time. Maybe some of us wrote about things that happened in California or in the United States or maybe outside of the United States. Does anyone in history include outside the United States? Right? And so this was a really interesting activity to work through with our kids where we're starting to build this idea of scale. Then we start to pose questions with our kids. Can our personal histories ever be finished? No, why not?
Because we're constantly growing and doing different things.
New generations. So now we have this idea where we've expanded this idea of personal history over the scale of time. Right? So my personal history, I have 2 boys. They're going to go on to have children, perhaps, and then their children's children, and now we have this idea of generations. I asked you in a very quick amount of time to make a snap judgment about where your personal history started. Many of us choose the beginning of our life, but in other cultures, it's very common to go back many, many generations, where your personal history and your identity is defined by your origin story, which is another really big concept that we get into in this course. So we did this with kids, and then this activity was sort of the introduction or provocation to this deep understanding of scale. What we did next is we gave them a series of different events to work through, and here they're working with these different threshold cards. In this course, a threshold is something where we have these Goldilocks conditions where you had the right time and the right place, and something happened and we can never go back. That's where we're at with the 4th Industrial Revolution, with this idea of AI. We've hit that threshold of deep learning, of machine learning. We're not going back anymore. The only way is forward. And so these different thresholds of development, the Big Bang, the beginning of life, agriculture and civilization, collective learning, these are different things that the kids are working with here. So we gave them a series of thresholds and some math, and said, okay, this is where they fall in scale to one another. And then we gave them a tape measure and a ball of yarn, and I said, I want you to go graph this. I want you to go put human history on a string. And they got that math in 2 seconds. They sat down, they divided all these little fractions. My little babies could not cut 100 feet of yarn, but they got through it, they went out there, they figured it out. I only gave them a 25-foot tape measure, and they could not figure out how to fold that sucker 4 times in a row, but they did. And they went out here and they have this really neat understanding that they're building of scale. We also created a scale of the universe. We've talked about, if Earth was the size of an atom, how does that influence all of these other things? Our 7th graders, our 6th graders just went through this project about looking at things from close up and far away, and how that changes our perspective. They were running around school with cameras, and they were taking pictures of things that were very small and then zooming out. It's really important for our kids to understand how your perspective changes your opinion. And so if you're looking at something at the molecular level, what you see in our universe is very different than if you're looking at this whole wide angle view. So just a little touch of what we're getting into in this course. There are, go to the next slide for me. These are the biggest progressions that we're teaching, that we're really trying to develop a deep understanding. Thinking across scale, integrating multiple disciplines, and making and testing claims. We've gone through this quite a bit with claim testers and how do you know what you believe. You've got intuition, logic, and authority, or really how you're gonna gut check those things. And I've told them, I said, you know what, I want you to believe nothing. For the next 24 hours, believe nothing at face value. Your teachers make claims all day long. I come up here and I say, this is true. Do you believe me? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, why? Why do you believe me? Just because I'm your teacher? Does that mean I know everything and I never make a mistake? You gotta fact check that stuff. And so we're starting, it's been really fun. We put up a whole bunch of statements around the room and they had to vote if they were true or false. And then we went through, how do you know that's true? How do you really know? And we got into this whole like flat earth debate with our 7th graders, and they were like, but I know it's round. I'm like, why? How do you know? If I cut out a piece this big, it's flat. They're like, but you have to zoom out. I'm like, you're getting it. We talk a lot about these narrations and thresholds. Everything is a story. And so learning about science and history and our personal timelines through this idea of storytelling is really important. Cause and consequence with the puppy in the shoe. Why do things happen? And then of course a lot of deep reading and writing is happening in this course. I could talk all day about it. We also repeat things over time and the curriculum will spiral. And so while we're working about thinking across scale is happening in quite a few different perspectives. So early what we talked about it in personal histories, we've talked about it in the scale of the universe, but we might also be thinking about the idea of scale with deep learning and machine learning, artificial intelligence, what that looks like over time. So got some cool stuff to think about. That's it, I think. Slide. Cute pictures of kids. So that was it for our first non-intro course where we started to get into some of the curriculum. These are some of our pre-Kers here that we're playing with patterns, which is really neat because it comes up again all the time. If you can recognize what a pattern is and where you find it. This is what it looks like in pre-K. When they move into middle school, they might be going through a scientific investigation in Mr. Briner's class and they're expecting a pattern, they're expecting something to happen. But then they go through and they do another experiment and that pattern doesn't hold true. They have to go back and figure out why. It's just kind of interesting for them. You want to jump in here?
Yeah, do we have the we're zooming through. We've skipped around a bit today. Okay, there. Okay.
Oh, yes.
Kind of. We've talked about MYP, PYP. Do you have questions? What's sticking out to you? Coming back to that original, you've seen a lot. You hopefully are thinking about something. What's your wonders? What are you feeling? What are you thinking? What are you questioning currently?
This is our first pass at this not just IB Learner Profile workshop where we're starting to get into some curriculum stuff. You guys are the guinea pigs. This is the first time we've done it. And if you have any feedback for us about how we can make this workshop more valuable for parents, it would be really helpful to us as we start to shape what this looks like moving forward. We're hoping to do some of these sneak peek kind of workshops in the new year. And so any feedback you have for us, I like this, scrap that.
So I love how you guys broke it down because I think it gives me a clear understanding on how you put it into play, on every day, right? I think what I would love to see is maybe more of the middle grades because I think we've talked a lot about the kindergarten, the garden, right? But I would love to see, because like I said, 3rd, 4th grade, they've done some pretty good activities. So just because, that resonates a little bit more of how it changes as they start growing up. And I think we talked a little bit about 5th and 6th grade. So,
well, today for the grade 2s, coming back to our grade 2, kind of bringing it full circle, they're talking about health and wellness. They have a yoga instructor coming in. They're doing a mini yoga workshop, which kind of touches lots of different elements. They're all brought in their yoga mats today and towels, and everybody's ready to do some yoga. So if you're here around at 1 o'clock, feel free to stop by grade 2. Grade 3s, they're working on looking at adaptations. They're looking at how animals adapt to their environment. They're also looking at how humans adapt to our environments, and they've started to touch a little bit on the technology and how that's having an impact. But then they're also going back to, for example, why does a frog have long legs? So we're kind of going from one direction to the other, but all focused on that concept of adaptation. They're doing research reports. They're going to be hopefully reaching out to you as a parents and some of our experts looking for expert knowledge, trying to get out into the community to get real knowledge other than just what's the teacher saying or what the book says. Our grade 4s and 5s are working on some bigger projects. The grade 4s are looking at, they did some sink or float activities. They're looking at some physics. They're looking at some of the design elements, what Becky was mentioning, and grade 5s, they're looking at government. This was great. The provocation for their unit was the teachers broke them into groups, and they all were responsible for one type of government. So you had anarchy, you had monarchy, you had democracy, you had oligarchy, and they all were in charge. They got 15 minutes out of the day to run the class through that lens of government. So you can imagine what anarchy was like, and you might imagine what democracy was, right? So it was really, and then as they were going into lunch, I just happened to be in the lunchroom when they were coming in, like, oh wow, what do you think about this, and which one would you choose, and why would you do this, and it was just chitter chatter throughout lunch, and like you said, that is something that sticks, and it drives conversation, it drives questioning, it drives not just, okay, I learned it, books closed, it's time for recess. They leave the classroom, it drives, it's that lifelong learning, it's that passion for learning, and it really pushes what we do. So, every grade is doing amazing things, and all the way up into the 8th grade and beyond at the prep, where they have the diploma program, they have the highest level of this learning, and you can imagine how powerful, what kind of great discussions are taking place in 11th and 12th grade, if that's what we're talking about in second.
That idea of government is our middle schoolers they're working through their democracy unit in their history class, and right now they're talking about diffusion of government. And so they had this system of government, but then we had these different either visitors from other countries or these trade routes that opened up, and how that brought new thinking, and how that has either created calm or chaos within a system of government that existed. And so they had some sort of similar activities. Theirs were with gummy bears, and so they're building these like gummy bear governments, and they to like trade their little people and attack each other's villages and see how it goes.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'd like to understand a little bit more about in the junior high level, because they are going from teacher to teacher all day long, and I'm not seeing a connection between the classes and an interdisciplinary method yet, I don't sit there with him and do his homework, so I don't really know. When he was younger, I did, so I don't know how they're integrating all of that. And then design and innovation, for him, I don't know what they're doing in terms of, like when he comes home, when he does a project, he brings it home. A lot of times he doesn't get direction, and he's like, I really am not sure what I'm supposed to do and why. And yet at school, it's all lecture, but I think. So I thought it was gonna be more hands-on and more integrative and more project-based in the classroom. So like those kinds of things I have questions about, and I'm not sure what's going on, and I don't get a lot of feedback, because he's
Welcome to middle
11.
school.
Yeah.
He just tells me about his friends
Middle school.
and
Yeah.
what parties are
That should be a
going
whole
on.
other parent workshop. It's like what to expect when you're,
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I don't know what's
Please do.
real.
We need that one.
honestly, I think we should.
One more year.
But I think to touch that question just a little bit, in the primary years, you'll see that a lot of it is transdisciplinary learning. And so like the classroom sort of gets cracked wide open, and as they're going through this government investigation, they might also include pieces from science and history and mathematics in the same unit. As they move into middle school, we shift from transdisciplinary, where it's like soup, to interdisciplinary, where they're kind of, it's like a buffet, and you pick up a couple different pieces as you go. In MYP, there are a couple of units that are very interdisciplinary. Our science fair unit is one of them, where they're writing a research paper in their English class, and they're working on the investigation in their science class. And you'll see a few of those interdisciplinary, really like strong handholds between concepts or between disciplines. But those are a few times throughout the year where you'll see deep overlapping. More than not, with the exception of this design class, the classes are still learning mathematics is math, science is science, and they have global perspectives and they have the concepts that bridge them between the curriculum, but the deep learning of the content is still there, because the level of the content they're learning is high. and sometimes you need focused time on science. What bridges the content in middle school are those key concepts. And so when we're looking at what patterns or what causation looks like in science, we're also looking at causation in history, we're looking at causation in English. And so it's not necessarily the theme or the topic that's bridging them, it's how they study them that's gonna bridge them. It's a little bit different.
And
How do you teach math in an IB way?
Is it,
It's
it's
still the
bridging it
same.
with a conversation, maybe with,
How you apply it?
it's how you think about it. So the learning is still the learning,
Right.
but how you process that information is different. So we're learning about percentages, proportions, and fractions, but starting with a conversation with the kids, is fair always equal? And they have this discussion like, heck yeah, it is, we got the same thing, it's equal. But then we go through mathematically the difference between ratios, proportions, and percentages, right? 50% equals 50%, right? Well, now if I convert those in different ways, what does that look like? Yeah, and so my decimal number is not always identical, but I feel like it's the same, and so just, but it's still getting into the content of math.
And a lot of it has to do with the approach to learning, right? As Becky mentioned with several examples, the teachers, as we, again, this will take a little bit of time, and we ask again for a bit of grace on the parent side as we transition to, it's a new way of teaching, it's a new way of learning for us. A lot of what we're already doing is there, but now it's putting it into a manageable either set of vocabulary or when the students go to math class, they're gonna see questions, they're gonna have more discussion, they're gonna have more independent and group work where they're thinking rather than just sitting with the textbook and doing. They're gonna be applying things, they're gonna be looking at different perspectives, they're gonna be looking at approaching problems from different angles. And that would be the same perhaps in literacy and in science. So in the middle years, you're gonna get more consistency in the way the teaching is presented. In primary years, it's the same, but they have a little bit more structure with the units. As you go into subjects, it becomes more discrete knowledge, but the approach to that knowledge and the approach to that teaching is where you get the consolidation and you get more consistency.
You also see it as we transition into MYP, a bigger emphasis on global-mindedness, a bigger emphasis on multiple perspectives, on understanding, they might have done a sheet of math problems, but now that math problems might have a purpose. They're graphing sustainability of a culture or of a forest. One of the math classes right now is doing linear graphs, I don't really know, about, it's more than I can understand. So they're doing linear graphs of the number of trees in the Brazilian rainforest before and after the fires. They're working on graphing, like their discrete skill is graphing, but they're just using relevant global information to apply that skill. And so as they're graphing the rainforest and before and after the fires and how that changed, they had to do a little bit of research, they had to get their numbers, they had to verify their data, they had to collaborate with a partner to make sure that their data was real. Then they had to figure out and synthesize, how do we take this set of numbers and put it in a graph. And so some of them chose to draw a picture and then count the number of squares that were covered before and after and use percentages to make their graphs. Some of them set up these different proportions and ratios. Some of them, I don't even know what they did. One of them tried to make an algorithm, I don't really know. But that's a sort of a little example of what that could look like in a math class, but the discrete learning is still the same.
Good questions.
Yeah.
Other feedback, other ideas? Puzzles, questions, wonders?
We also have an internal IB website that we're sharing with our teachers that has a lot of our planning, unit plans. If you ever want to come in and sit through, it's a lot of information to just send to you on your own. But if you're ever curious, and we'd be happy to open it up here and say, this is what, I'm kind of curious of what that looks like over time. We'd be happy to sit down with you.
And I guess kind of in closing here, I wanted to share with everybody that we do have, sorry for going back and forth. Our first two workshops, I think most of you have had a chance to join us for that. But today's workshop will also be posted. We have a Fairmont YouTube channel thanks to our wonderful IT department. But they live on, and if you ever want to come back and, what was that they said, or what was that resource, or what was the idea they were talking about, these will be up probably next week available. I have included the link in this week's newsletter the Fairmont News. So you'll have access to the Fairmont YouTube channel. It'll go to the same place, so you can always just check back periodically. We'll also, we're looking at making the slides available, making some of the information available to you. We're still working on the best format, as Becky said. It's kind of hard to just throw everything out there, and, so. But we're always here for questions. We're always eager to share more. Yeah.
And where are we on the timeline of getting accredited?
Yeah. Good question.
I actually got an email this morning.
Oh, good.
Just like,
We are on track.
Scary.
We are on schedule. We're actually a little bit ahead of schedule thanks to Ms. Lugo and her hard work. I think it's at the end of it. Yeah. MYP has just submitted a massive accreditation document. Tons of work. Yeah, application was submitted this fall, and Becky has the good fortune of having the MYP authorization visit coming in spring, February.
we got an email this morning that they confirmed our visit February 24th to the 26th.
Okay.
And so we will definitely be calling all my middle school parents in the room for some help. They will want to chat with you a little bit about what your experience has been like, and so we'll be buying all of you coffee.
So is the EYP program specific to this location, or it's all campuses?
They're specific to this location.
Specific to this
Mhm.
campus.
Our high school, a couple miles down the street, also runs the diploma program, and they're in consideration for the middle school program in grades 9 and 10.
Is prep in line with you on the middle year program? Because
They are, they're not quite, they're a little bit behind us. And so our campus went really, really fast. Traditionally, IB authorization is like a 3-ish year process, and we really went faster than normal on that one, and the prep is on a standard timeline. And so you'd have to ask their coordinator, but I think that their timeline is 1 year behind ours. And so as the 8th graders graduate, they'll move into a similar place of candidacy.
And the PYP coming up, we're kind of one step behind the MYP. The PYP is coming up. We have our documentation due in the spring, and then we'll have our visit coming up in the fall. We also have WASC, which is the Western Association of Schools and Colleges, another widely recognized accreditation agency that's coming in, and they help us to work through where we are and what our best steps forward would be. And we have those visits synced up here. So you'll be hearing a lot from us about asking for your feedback, asking for input, and hopefully we can share a bit of that too.
The IB authorization visit, the purpose of that, we've submitted our application and our report with documentation about unit plans and all that stuff. And their purpose is to come out and verify that what we've said we're doing is happening in practice. The WASC visit is similar, but the WASC visiting team is really looking at best practices within the school for anything. It doesn't have to be IB. We are currently WASC accredited. We went through that 6 years ago, and so this is our reevaluation cycle where they're coming out, and when they visited us last time, they made some recommendations for growth and progress, and they want to come out and see where we are in our action plan and how we've been doing. When they came out 6 years ago, their recommendations were in building a balanced curriculum, which was part of our draw for IB, is that it really helped us look at things that were more engaging. They noticed that our kids were memorizing and repeating information, and they encouraged us to explore opportunities to help engage kids in a way that was a little bit deeper. They asked us to build a parking garage, which we're just not going to talk about, which we totally agree. And they also talked a little bit about how we're supporting the achievement gap between our students, between our kids who might be struggling in mathematics or literacy and the students that are doing really, really well, and how we're supporting all of our learners. So we've been doing some work there. If you have children that have ever been to ASSIST, some of those things have changed in elementary school, and we're continuing to reflect on those practices.
Well, we appreciate you coming today. Thank you. I know your time is very valuable. And,
Thank you.
feel free to reach out.
And thank you so much. Please take a muffin and some coffee.